Good day or good morning to everybody. We're just gonna give it 35, 40 seconds more for the remaining ones to sign up or join in for this particular exclusive webinar, and then we'll get going. Very good. I think we can get going now. We have I wouldn't say a tight agenda, but we have a lot of slides and a lot of content, exciting content to share with you viewers joining in for this exclusive webinar on China market trends, but also tapping into the topic related to which part or which role China will actually play in the world economy going forward. Thank you for signing up, and on behalf of DSV in UK, Ireland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland, I hereby welcome you to hopefully a very exciting webinar. My name is Morten Slot Madsen, and I'm the Managing Director of DSV Air & Sea in Norway and in Sweden. But today I am a facilitator on behalf of the entire DSV. With me today, I have Christina Botrup, who is a China analyst, but also a writer. Christina, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very good. Now I could hear you too. I was so lucky to meet Christina in another setting where she did a verbal and physical speak, very exciting, and I came to that thought, okay, why not share this content with all the customers of DSV or potential customers of DSV? And then we actually coordinated and facilitated this arrangement today, but across several countries. Before we get going, Christina, maybe you can give somewhat a background on this particular webinar, but also where you're coming from, your relation to China and whatnot.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today, all of you, about China. My own story with China actually started 20 years ago when I just graduated as a young business journalist. I went to China with my husband, and that's how it all started. I realized that a lot of things were going on at that time, and basically you can say that I have followed Chinese companies from pure copycats till now, where many of them are actually front runners in many of the technologies that are shaping our future today. It has been quite remarkable, and I must say that I've been surprised myself. I've written several books. The latest one came out in the end of 2018, which was about the great tech revolution. So basically, I've followed very closely the digital economy of China and how they use and implement AI solutions. And I think it's interesting to focus on this because we often tend to forget this part in our part of the world. In Europe, we tend to look at Silicon Valley when we want inspiration or understand the future. And I think China is actually, there's a huge China factor in all kinds of trade and business. So I think it's really good that you bring this focus to life here today.
And I fully agree with you. We have, if we look into our data, there's no doubt that China, or you could say Far East Asia, is playing a significant role when it comes to the logistical market worldwide. Whether it's UK, Ireland, or whether it's one of the Nordic countries, it doesn't really matter. They have a significant impact one way or the other, and I believe that we also have that. If we look into our general household economies, what type of content that we have in our own lives, they also have somewhat of relation to China, or if not, countries in the region of Far East Asia. Christina, I know that, and welcome to you. I know that that you have a presentation to share. So if you just share that, then meanwhile you take the control for this particular session. Then I can also tap into to the topic that, as a viewer of this particular webinar, you can also submit potential questions or comments, and we will basically cover them. Christina has a lot of energy, even more than I do. And I'm sure that she will cover a lot during the next 35 minutes, maybe 40. We'll see. I will tap into questions and comments if it arises, you know, for my sake. But we will also cover Q&A in the later stage of the session. So please make use of that particular feature. Christina, you are free to share your presentation if you wish.
Thank you very much. So today what I'll be talking about is how China has this new role in global supply chain, and also how current trends in China impacts all kinds of international business. And this week, actually, the Parliament of China is gathered in Beijing. And yesterday, the Premier Li Qiang had a speech, the work report of the Chinese government, where he talked about how the government sees China's economy right now, and also the growth target for this year, which is 5%, just like last year. It's interesting because in the West, done media, we see so many stories about how China's economy is in deep fall, how consumption is very low, the real estate crisis. There are a lot of negative stories, and certainly the whole sentiment and the whole story about China has changed a lot. As I mentioned, I've covered China for 20 years. And it has been a big boom story for many, many years. But now some economists say that the growth miracle is actually over. I think the big shift happened around the pandemic, which caused several shocks in global supply chains, causing a lot of companies to reconsider their China strategy. Then the war in Ukraine was another shock. It made us aware in Europe that we were too dependent on Russian oil and gas and so on. And yeah, I think most people now realize that we are even more dependent on China. And that's why we really have to pay attention to what's happening there, especially for all the technologies, components, products that we need for our green transition. But the reason why economists are so pessimistic right now about China's economic near economic future is because there are some really huge structural problems. So the property crisis, it's a collapse, right? It's a bubble that has burst. But I think it's important to note that this is actually something the Chinese government wanted to do. So the 20 years I've covered China, I've seen how they tried and tried and tried, because the market just went like this. A lot of speculation, a lot of unhealthy development and loans, and causing normal people in China having difficulties buying an apartment. And the reason why it's so important to burst this bubble and make a more healthy property market is actually that it is very closely related to the demography of China. So the extremely low birth rate that we see now in China, you know, the population, which used to be the world's largest with 1.4 billion people, just surpassed by India last year, has actually declined for the last 2 years. This is a problem for an economy, because if you don't have babies, you don't have future consumers, right? So the Chinese government really believes that it has to be painful right now to restructure the housing market, the property development, and they expect that people will have more babies after this. So that's one explanation. Also, the foreign investment has declined. As I said, it's like really under the floor now, and this is about confidence. So during the pandemic, China basically closed down for 3 years. I moved to China with my family for the second time during the pandemic, so I felt on my own body the so-called zero COVID policy, but it meant that the borders were closed. And as I mentioned, all these shocks in supply chain and the focus on risk management and so on has had huge impact on China's economy as investors, foreign companies have tried to diversify their investments. So in Europe, we call it de-risking, to bring down the risk of only having one supplier from China, for example. In the US, there are strong voices talking about decoupling. So basically, they believe it's possible to totally separate the world's largest, which is the American economy, and the Chinese economy. Some people say that's impossible in this age of globalization. But as you know, as you're probably aware, there are strong voices in many parts of the world now in the West who strongly advocate that globalization is a bad idea. We should only trade with those who share our values, friendshoring, and what you call it. But I've been looking into these questions when I lived in China, and I actually moved on to Singapore because of the lockdowns. And I had a chance to travel a lot in Southeast Asia, and I came to Vietnam. I met the factory owners there. So when you diversify your manufacturing from a huge factory or several suppliers in China and use the so-called China Plus One strategy that a lot of companies did to find an alternative in Vietnam or India, it actually appears that many of those factories are owned by Chinese companies anyway. So especially in terms of solar panels, there has been a lot of trouble, and some companies really try to diversify, and they want to buy them from Cambodia or Vietnam or even Europe if possible. But so far, my conclusion, and I've seen so many like documentation and reports about this too, the conclusion is quite clear. Right now, supply chains are only getting longer and more expensive and less transparent. So this is not really good on the short term. Of course, on the longer term, it's possible to bring down the risk and maybe even be independent from China. But experts say in many sectors, this will take like 10, 15 years. Of course,
if I can put a note to that, and I'm not here to determine whether whether one country is doing something bad or not. That is not my role in particular, and I think that's the audience themselves. But we've definitely seen, in the media, is also the US talking about whether they should insource some of their production, and we have then analyzed, okay, what will that basically mean? That to insource a lot of the stuff that you get produced in Far East Asia or even in China, what will that actually cost, or what will that take? Well, if we look at US alone, well, they will be in need of an entirely new infrastructure, because the infrastructure that they have today is basically coming out of the 50s and the 60s. So bridges, highways, and what's not is like super outdated. So they won't have the capacity nor the finances to actually get that redeployed. So we need the sourcing one way or the other. Just as a comment here.
That's a good point, and what I paid a lot of interest to recently is you actually see now that the US is trading more with Mexico than with China, and China used to be the largest trading partner for like 17 or 18 years. So you see a lot of investments in Mexico, but again, who is investing in Mexico? A lot of Chinese electric car producers, battery producers, so that the Americans can buy them from someone they trust, or they share values with, or what you call it. But the point is, many of these factories are impossible to actually establish without Chinese components or technology. This is the fact today, and that's hard to accept for a lot of countries in the West. As I mentioned, risk is a big topic, as you're probably all aware. All management groups, boardrooms, it's all about, of course, sustainability is an important topic today, but risk management and resilience is very important. And the biggest risk scenario or like the big fear that many companies have, obviously, about China is whether there could be a war over Taiwan. So you can see Taiwan is marked with yellow here, and in China, Taiwan is considered a province of China, it's very clear that if Taiwan said we are now an independent country, if they declare their independence, China will no doubt invade with their military. That's for sure. But probably they will never do that because it's a big risk for Taiwan. So the big question is, would China invade Taiwan? And I think most experts agree that it's unlikely to happen, at least for the next few years, because China has, as I mentioned, a lot of economic woes, a lot of trouble to deal with. They still have like 500 million people who live quite a tough life with very small income. And if they start a war, and it will cost even more problems in the Chinese economy, it would be very, very unpopular. But if you look at it with the eyes of Beijing or China, look at all the black stars. Those are American military bases. So a lot of people in the Western media often claim that China is very provocative and aggressive in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. But if you look at it with the eyes of Beijing, they feel encircled. They feel that America is actually in their backyard at all their borders, you know, and this creates a lot of tension. And there are tensions with the Philippines, but as for now, it seems that there is no big risk that China would directly invade. We hear a lot of stories that they even have a year for that, like 2027, some people said, but actually China never said that themselves. It's like American intelligence report that said that. But I think when you talk about these risks and you look at the world today, I would like you to look at this map. This is a map over the countries that imposed sanctions on Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. And I think that's at least how I feel when I travel around in Europe. We tend to think that most people in the world think like us, right? But actually, as you can see, it's only America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and then of course the two American allies in Asia, South Korea and Japan, that has imposed sanction on Russia. So does this mean that the so-called rest of the world, which represent 85% of the world's population, that they don't care or they agree with Russia? No, of course not. They have a hard time accepting an invasion from Russia. But what they do is they insist in the right to trade. You know, they strongly believe in globalization and they don't believe in sanctions. They believe that it's much better to be neutral, or you could call it non-aligned. They're not aligned with either Russia or the US or China or the US in many of these big power conflicts that we see today. They do what is best for them, and that is to be so-called neutral and trade with everyone. And it's interesting because India, as you know, is called the world's largest democracy. And they also trade with Russia, and they buy a lot of Russian gas and oil, and then they export it to the EU, you know. So this is a big dilemma because the world is not black and white. And for us, I think especially in the US and also for many politicians in the EU, it's much easier if it's black and white. Either you're with or you are against, right? But it's not that simple. So I think that's important to remember. And there's a lot of talk about a new world order. And so is there already a new world order? Or are there several new world orders? At least a lot of people are kind of scared by the close friendship of China's leader Xi Jinping and Russia's leader Putin, because they are afraid what could China do, you know. But China is trading with Russia, so they trade for $200 billion US dollars last year, and China supplies Russia with a lot of the products they can't get anywhere else. But not weapons. So they have a red line there. They know if they do that, the EU and the US will impose sanctions on China as well. But the thing they do agree on, the thing they have in common, is they believe in a new world order where US has less power, where US is less powerful, and where there are multiple great powers who have a say on the global agenda. And if you talk about a new world order, there is one new world order that a lot of people now see evolving. You could call it the Global South movement. So even though Russia and China is not below the equator, and you wouldn't consider it Global South, they align with the Global South countries. So a lot of developing countries in Africa and South America, Middle East, all over the world, Asia, they believe that, they have this common shared belief that the US is too powerful. And for many of them, they are afraid of sanctions. They are afraid that they could be the next country who could suffer because they did something that the US didn't like, and they would use their dollar power and their international bank transfer SWIFT system power to impose sanctions. So that's why we see many countries in Global South now cooperating in new kinds of groups like the BRICS that has just been expanded. Originally it was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa, but now they invited more countries to join. So some of the things they have in common is try to make an alternative trading system where they use their own currencies. It doesn't mean that they can overtake the dollar position, the Chinese yuan or the Indian rupees. It's about risk management, simply. It's too risky for them to trade only in US dollar. And if you look at the center of economic gravity, I think it's good for us in Europe as well to look at this. So even though China is growing very slow compared to the past 30 years, you see that it's still where the growth is in this world, right? This year and next year, you see that the center of economic gravity has already moved to Asia, and economy paves the road for political influence and world order as well. In China, a lot of people are talking about a new Cold War. So even though many people in the West say it's not a Cold War, you can't compare that with the first Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West. In China, it feels like a Cold War when you can't import the most advanced computer chips, when you face restrictions on AI. There are so many trade restrictions that were started by Donald Trump when he launched a trade war in 2018. And it was actually continued by Biden when he took over. And that's why, if you're thinking what will happen with a new president in the White House in the US, it doesn't really matter. If you look at it with the perspective of China, of course, Trump is a wild card, right? You never know what can happen in the world. But in terms of trade, in terms of this big power struggle between China and US, it's unlikely that anything will change. It's not about ideology, if you're a communist or a liberalist or a Democrat. It's about access to markets and technology. I believe that it has a lot to do with technology. This is not very pretty, this chart, but I copied it directly from a big report published by an Australian think tank called Australian, it's ASPY. It's a very long name, but basically they try to map the most important critical technologies for the future, and China leads in 37 out of 44. So I basically brought you this sheet so you can see that anything related to manufacturing, China is no doubt a leader today, but also in some areas that could be used for military purposes. And that is, of course, a big worry and fear in the United States. China is surprised when they launched hypersonic missiles. The US were not aware that China had this breakthrough. So I believe the big power struggle is all about technology. And China is still lacking behind in a few areas, but if you look at this chart, it was launched back in 2014, and I remember when I saw this plan, when the government of China launched it, I thought it was worrying for European industry, because this plan has this goal that in these 10 industries, China will be a world leader in 2025. That's 1 year from now. So we can already evaluate a bit. And I must say that the last areas they lack now is in computer chips. Chinese producers can still not make the most advanced, but they are having breakthroughs. Both car producers and Huawei launched 7 nanometers, which was surprising for a lot of people. So basically, you can say that the more the US try to restrict China from getting access to technology from the US, they will invest more money into trying to build it themselves, right?
Christina?
Yeah.
Just one question related to your previous comment on the Cold War that is outspoken in the public area in China. So these imposed sanctions by primarily the U.S. government on, let's say, the super chips. Is this something that the general public they feel it on a daily basis, or is it just something that they talk about because of media exposure on the subject in China?
It's mainly something experts and government officials and a lot of business leaders, they feel it in. I mean, business people feel it in their daily life because they have problems trading or buying things or dealing with people. But for normal people in China, it's more about the people-to-people exchange that has suffered a lot in recent years. So it has been harder to access universities. It has been harder to get a visa. There has been cases about Chinese students spying, And in the EU, we also see a lot of, or in Europe in general and England as well, we see a lot of universities trying to halt their close cooperation with Chinese universities because of fear, because of geopolitics. And right now, nobody really knows how to deal with this because it's a big problem if the big power policy is down to the level where a young person can't study in another country, right? So a lot of forces are trying to deal with this and make it easier and make it detached from the big power struggle, but it's hard. So it is something you feel.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this plan, basically, China still has a little bit to learn in terms of biomedicine, but I just heard the speech of the premier yesterday, and this is one of the industrial policies that they spend a lot of focus and money on and research and development on this year. And people I know in the industry are saying maybe not 25, but then around that time, Chinese companies will be challenging some of the largest companies in the world in these areas. I think it's when you look at the new energy vehicles, for example, electric cars, you had the big lockdown and the borders were basically closed for 3 years in China. And then they had the auto show in April last year, and people from Germany, Spain, the auto industry came, and they were shocked what happened those 3 years. So basically, you have seen a lot of money being channeled into that. And actually, if you look at this chart, I think it's really, really interesting that the loans you couldn't get for your real estate development project, those money you could instead use to build a battery factory or a heat pump factory, or you could do, investments in everything related to green manufacturing. It says manufacturing here, but it's actually green manufacturing. And of course, it's a new driver of China's economy. But the problem for China's leaders right now is that the real estate was almost 1/3 of China's GDP before the crisis. And this new manufacturing that is creating jobs and so on, it's the most positive estimate or optimistic estimates would state that it's around 10% of economy. So they still need new drivers, right? But it's interesting that you see this huge investments. And as I mentioned, Chinese electric vehicle makers have been taking their the world with storm, you can say. They have been expanding rapidly. BYD, Build Your Dream, overtook Tesla in sales last year and became the world's largest EV maker. And I think it's interesting because just a few years ago, Elon Musk from Tesla was asked, how about your competition in China? Do you know BYD? And he just laughed and he said, have you seen their cars? So it's really, the world is changing, you know, and they are learning really fast. The interesting thing about BYD is that they have the whole supply chain. So they even sell batteries to Tesla. They own mines where they mine lithium. They produce their own batteries, their own computer chips, etc. They just launched a ship to export cars. So the first ship, the Explorer, just arrived in Germany. I think it was last week or the week before. And it can take, I think, between 7,000 and 9,000 cars. So this shows that I think so far Chinese EV makers ordered 300 ships like that for the next 5 or 6 years. So that just shows that they really believe they can export a lot of cars. And you could ask yourself this question: would you drive a Chinese car? I mean, a car made in China?
Well, you can look at the tarmac down here, hello Norway, which means hello Norway.
Yeah.
You know, I live in Norway on a daily basis, and I think for every 100 cars that are imported into,
we can't hear you now.
Can you hear me now? You hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think for every new car that is being introduced into the Norwegian market, 60 cars of those are electrician, and a lot of them are coming from China. So no doubt that yes, the general economies worldwide are of course also importing Chinese EV vehicles.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I meet some people sometimes who are like, no, I would never drive a car made in China, even though China can make rockets and high-speed trains, etc. But just some people say that. But the funny thing, they might be driving a Tesla, which is made in Shanghai, right? So actually last year, China became the largest car exporter in the whole world. And that surprised me, because one thing is they have an edge on electric cars, but still that the volume could become so big that they overtook Japan and Germany and is now the largest exporter of cars in the world. That is quite fascinating. The thing is, if you are looking into whether you should buy yourself an electric car, my guess is don't blame me later, but you know, the prices should be going down further. So there is overcapacity in China in all these green manufacturing areas. So when they tried to burst the property bubble, what they did instead, in a way, was that they built up a new bubble in the green manufacturing economy. So actually, this is something they talk a lot about in Beijing these days, where the parliament is gathered and the political consultative conference is gathered with a lot of expert and industry leaders who are giving advice to the Chinese government. They're all worried about overcapacity. There are two problems with overcapacity. One problem is it's not very sustainable. Prices go down. People might have to lay off people. Factories might have to lay off people if there's simply not demand for all the supply they can produce. And the other problem is political. Everyone in the EU is now looking at this overcapacity problem in China, and they know that Chinese producers will flood the market with cheap products. And if you look at the green transition that is happening right now, you should say, wow, that's fantastic. Everyone can afford a cheap BYD electric car or solar panels. The prices were already reduced with 80% the last 10, 15 years, and now they're going down further. That's good news for our planet, right? But then again, how about our industry in Europe? How can we protect our workforce, our factories that produce cars, batteries, etc.? It's a big dilemma, and I actually believe that right now the EU is doing this investigation whether Chinese electric car producers got subsidized, state subsidized or not. And I can share with you, of course they did, everyone knows that, it's in all the official plans in China, it's no secret. So they're investigating something they already know. Then they might impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. And if they do that, it's very likely that China will impose some trade restrictions on European goods. They kind of warned that they will impose a tariff on brandy from cognac from France, but this there is a risk of trade war if this is the line the EU is going to go through with. But it's a big problem with overcapacity. We are talking about maybe China can probably produce 50% more batteries than global electric car makers can absorb during the next 2-3 years. So it's huge, and the prices will go down. Another structural problem that I talked briefly about is the demography of China. You know, they had so many years with one-child policy. A lot of young people today are allowed to have 2-3 children because they have a 3-child policy now, but they don't. As I told you, it's very expensive to buy an apartment. You still have to take care, if you're too lonely child, you're married, you have to take care of both parents, right? So there are many structural problems, and they're trying to deal with that to raise the pension age, to make it more attractive to have children with cash bonuses and better childcare. It's something that is going to take a long time, and as long as people don't have too much confidence that the economy will be better, they will probably not produce a lot of children. So it's a big dilemma right now. But I talked about unemployment, and actually for the youth between 18 and 24, it's historical high. But at the same time, there is a labor shortage in many industries, in the healthcare sector, in the education sector, in many of those green manufacturing sector. The most popular or successful companies actually lack qualified labor. So what is the solution? In China, there's no doubt technology is the solution. And that's actually one of the reasons why they invest so much money in high technology development and want to automize a lot of industries. And I think for this purpose, I think the Shenzhen port is an interesting case. It was automized by Huawei, which lost a lot of business around the world because of geopolitics and problems with the US and so on. But instead they changed their business models, and they are now building digital twins. And Shenzhen port is now, as far as I know, the most automized port in the whole world. And yeah, of course, it reduced the number of staff in the port because most of it is running on autonomous vehicles and big cranes and all that. But those people are doing other jobs. So in China, you don't so much see the discussion about man versus machine as we do in Europe. They are more like, how can we use artificial intelligence as a tool to improve our customer service or improve our workflow, or our processes, reduce our carbon footprint or reduce our energy usage or whatever. And it's a very different approach, and China is actually leading in the practical implementation of AI. There are so many conferences in Scandinavia and in Europe in general about AI. It's the big thing, right? But you very seldom hear about what's happening in China, despite the fact that Chinese companies are often 5 to 8 years ahead in the implementation of AI. So we actually see new business models coming out of China that are powered by the use of data and artificial intelligence. You probably all know TikTok, but there are more. And this one, Shein, you probably heard about it. It's like the world's largest fast fashion company now. And it's an app, and it has taken the world by storm. It has overtaken Amazon. That's when they were like, what's going on in the US? It's very popular all over the world. They are in most countries in the world now. And the user experience you have in Oslo or Dublin or Portugal, it's all different. So it depends on what they're simply looking into social media, using the data to build and design the products that is talked about, that is trending in the specific regions or markets. And this makes it extremely popular, and then it's extremely cheap. So their prices, some investigations show that they are like half price of H&M, and young people, despite their thoughts about being very sustainable, they apparently like to buy directly from the factory in China because it's very, very cheap. And they have these halls where young women are like influencers talking about the products, and that's very popular, very viral. And then you're thinking, that's just that company, right? No, there are more. And actually, because of what I just told you, the overcapacity problem in China, this was specifically in the green manufacturing sector. But in general, as China's economy is slowing down, grow is much slower than before, the tech giants need to find new expansion areas. They need to find new growth, right, outside China. And China is already the largest digital economy in the world with 1.2 billion internet users. So despite the fact that Google and Facebook and Twitter are all banned or blocked in China because of censorship, you would think that they only have these copy versions of our apps, right? But actually, those of you who deal with China, you know that WeChat is like a super app. It's more advanced than anything you know in this part of the world. You can pay with it. You can book flight tickets. You can, you can do things, official things on it. You can do everything on this app, right? So Temu is the new kid on the block, and this company was launched with Super Bowl last year, and they spent millions on this shop like a billionaire advertisement, and they were back this year, that the recent Super Bowl, and you know they spent so much money that it actually rocks the whole advertising market on social media, because it drives prices up because they have so much money to spend. And the company behind it is a huge e-commerce company in China called Pinduoduo, that actually took a lot of market share from Alibaba, which used to be the most like successful platform, right? And they're going abroad with this Temu international app with low prices, and there is not a category where you shouldn't fear disruption, because they sell office supplies, building material, fashion products, you know, you name it, they have it on Temu. And if you're interested, I warn you, if you start Googling Temu, you will get spammed with advertisements. So be careful with that.
I bought a product on Temu recently, and these ads are like everywhere in my feed. But
Yeah.
what is quite interesting is that, you know, firstly, they have these super low prices, and secondly, how do they source within all those segments that you just mentioned, you know, whether it's office supply, clothing, other retail categories or stuff? How do they accommodate that?
They have this huge network of suppliers on the ground in China, and they are all a part of a digital ecosystem. So it's all happening like an e-commerce platform, and they can tap into that, all these suppliers. So it works, is extremely fast and extremely efficient. And there are a lot of stories about, you know, they are quite tough. If you don't meet demand and speed, you are out. You know, as a producer, you have to be a part of this ecosystem. It's a big benefit. You can sell a lot. If you produce a t-shirt that, you know, is a global success, you can be, you can earn a lot, right? But what is overwhelming is that they ship Temu ships 4,000 tons a day, and Shein 5,000 tons a day. It's just crazy. So yeah, this is, as I said, this is disruption. And that's why no matter what industry you're in, you should watch them, because, you know, Shein was a company that H&M and Zara didn't even hear of until recently, and they realized they are now about to overtake both of them in terms of revenue and turnover. So it's remarkable, and we will see more, as I said, because of the trouble in China. They need to expand, and this is their advertisement. You can see how cheap the products are.
That's incredible. Everybody was talking about Amazon a few years ago. And
and the thing you can learn from this platform, if you're looking into how can I digitize my customer experience, or get inspiration for that, Temu is so interesting because they use gamification and people stay on that app much longer than Amazon. On Amazon, you enter to buy something, right? You search, you buy, you leave. Here, you open this and you are entertained. You have this lucky draw. How many percentage discount do you want, etc. And it's sticky. It's addictive, and that's quite dangerous because you might buy something you don't need at all. So the last thing I would like to mention, which is also a trend, is that because China has always been lagging behind in many industries, like traditional combustion engine cars, China never really caught up with the producers in the West. They did for sure with electric cars, but now we see a trend where they are creating whole new industries and new markets that can drive economy in the future. So low altitude air mobility is a thing. So I know you have these flying cars in the US and Middle East, they are testing as well. But the point is China is ahead in terms of regulation. So EHang actually got the first commercial license to operate. And sometimes this year it will be possible to actually fly these flying cars and drones in China, and they're building these big places to charge them, planning routes, and they're already discussing with neighboring countries what to do when they are crossing borders in the future, right? And why do China do this? Why is it important to be first? This is about technological standard, and China really has an interest to be first and shape the standards, and we see that happening in some area. To sum up, Xi Jinping's agenda is very much about risk management. In that sense, China is not so different from countries in Europe. There are a lot of uncertainty in this world now, and you need to minimize risk, right? But to do that, China is investing heavily, and even more heavily this year, in research and development and advanced technologies, because they believe they have to try to be independent or self-reliant, because you never know what can happen with sanctions and so on. China still sees itself as a huge exporter and a manufacturing hub for the whole world. But make no mistake, they don't want to produce our Barbie dolls and our fireworks in the future. They already kind of outsource that part to other countries. So it's advanced manufacturing, light manufacturing that is not dirty. That's one of the big dilemmas now, where we are bringing back some of those kind of factories to Europe. It's actually polluting, right? That's why we moved it to China in the first place. So it's a big dilemma facing European countries now, that we need to find ways to produce where it's not damaging to the environment. China also sees itself as a leader of the global South. I mentioned this non-aligned movement of countries that try to be neutral when it comes to US, China, when it comes to Russia, US, Russia, NATO, etc. But in a way, many of them, China is on their team anyway. Even though they don't align with China, they share a lot of interest. And then they have this shared interest of a multipolar world order. But of course, if you ask Xi Jinping, or if you look into his inner thoughts, maybe he believes that China should play a dominant role in a multipolar world, because China is the second largest economy in the world. And in Asia specifically, China wants to be the leader for sure. And so the things I told you here today is, I hope you see that China is really gravity. So my most important point is actually that if you want to stay ahead of the curve in terms of what could shape global trade, you should really pay attention to China, because in many ways, China is gravity. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy Dragon New Year. I think we have time for questions, right?
We do, and we also have a few. But thank you for very, very interesting insights that you're sharing here, Christina. I'm just curious overall if we have hundreds of shippers, customers of DSV shipping cargo one way or the other. I would probably say that a vast majority have a strong relation with China. How should they stay in advance? Is it on a collaborative level, or is it more like monitor what is going on? What would be your suggestion to the entire pool of audience on this particular webinar?
Yeah, I think if you have an office in China or you have partners in China, it's a very good way to learn a lot, right? And I'm sure many of your companies are already doing that. But I think you could probably use it more. It's valuable. The problem is sometimes it can be hard to get some of the key points or insights out of your colleagues, because maybe they're afraid to speak up. Maybe it's politically sensitive, but there are ways to get around it. If you have a workshop or you ask everyone to send an email with 10 points that could improve something, they will happily share. So that's one way that you can do if you cooperate or collaborate with partners or staff, employees, colleagues. The other thing is, of course, monitoring, and I'm sure that you're in international trade, and of course you focus on what's going on many places in the world, Red Sea, Gaza. There are so many things that can disrupt business nowadays. But I just believe that it's worth paying extra attention to China, as I mentioned, because China is the largest car market in the world. So even if they tell you in Germany, no, it will be hydrogen or Brent powered cars, it doesn't really matter when the largest market in the world decided it's going to be electric. The producers have to go that way. So in that sense, you are ahead of the curve if you realize and understand that. And I think there are many areas where the point is exactly the same.
Fully understand that there's more than just the tip of your nose, that we're more than Europe. We are the entire globe, right? And you need to somewhat conquer that thought or perspective to it. We do have a few questions coming in now, Christina. Actually, we take one of the recent ones. Will China continue to invest into the Belt and the road initiative directly going from China and then to Europe?
That's a very good question for this group. I think, the Belt and Road Initiative is all these huge infrastructure projects, but we have seen recently that, first of all, China invested less because of risk management, and they also had a lot of trouble. Some of the areas where they invested, they had political issues, they had economic woes where countries couldn't pay their debt, etc. But the main trend right now is that they go leaner and greener. I think that's what they call it themselves. But it's about, overcapacity. So China has a lot of solar capacity. They need that in Africa. So there is a very good match there. So instead of financing, big, huge infrastructure projects, maybe they finance and invest in green transition, in green infrastructure and digital infrastructure. And that's the new trend right now. And again, if we insist in Europe that, we want to buy our solar panels from Germany, despite the fact they are more expensive, we just have to understand that China can still find a market in many, many countries around the world that are happy with the low prices, and they don't really care where it came from as long as it was cheap, right? So
your short answer to the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, what is that? That they will keep on investing into it?
They will keep on investing, yes. Yeah. But we already see that going into this year, that it's smaller projects, and it's like a solar power park or wind turbines, or it's green infrastructure and digital infrastructure, 5G, 4G, 3G, even in some countries,
Okay, good. We have another one here. China is spending a lot on military. How do you see the aggressiveness in terms of expanding their territory against the Japanese, Philippines, Korea, etc.? We have touched upon it, but there are more to this than Taiwan.
Yeah, yesterday it came out that they expect the economy to grow around 5%, but the military budget is growing around 7%. So some people are like, that's scary, right? Because they need to tighten their belt in so many other areas, but not in military. But because of the world today, I'm sure that the Chinese government will keep investing, and in their eyes, they are not aggressive. They are protecting their territorial rights. That's what they say, right? They are afraid that what could happen in around Taiwan if Taiwan would declare independency with a backup from the US or from Europe. But how the world looks very, as I said, uncertain today, because if Donald Trump is elected, what will happen with Taiwan? Will US protect Taiwan? Nobody knows, right? But what China does know is that they have to strengthen their military. They haven't been in a war for decades, They haven't been trained in real combat, and some people are skeptical that they can do that. Others say that we probably underestimate the capabilities of China in the South China Sea, because they have a lot of things going on that nobody knows. But what I think is worrying right now is the Philippines. They have clashes with the fishermen, and they are going. I mean, they are almost. They are actually. Happening accidents where ships from the Chinese Coast Guard or a fisher boat from the Philippines collide, and that's very scary. And some people say that's probably more scary than around Taiwan, because the Philippines really want to claim their rights. The problem is it's disputed areas. China strongly believes it's their area, but Philippines believe it's their area, right? It's very tense.
Very good. I think I've read somewhere that China now has the biggest naval fleet. If we measure on number of ships, but I do not know the sheer size of those particular ships. But nevertheless, one remaining question here as a final one, and this has a person here curious on the real estate bubble and the relationship it has with the increasing or encouraging locals to give birth. Why is there a link in between this? Is that because the intentions of lowering the prices for households will enable people to buy into households so they can cater to building families? Was that the essence?
Yes, thank you for that question. Simply, you can actually see some charts where you see the housing prices going up like this and the birth rate going down. So many economists in China really believe that it's so connected, and I personally know so many people who cannot afford to move away from their own parents when they're married. That's not really a good start of having your own family and children. And even if they have one child, childcare, they depend on their parents to take care of the child, but the parents might have to work longer because pension age is also being raised now. So who will take care of the kid? There are structural problems. There is not a good system for nursery for babies, only for kindergarten, right, or preschool. So simply because of that, and then the price. Housing, education. That's why the government also cracked down on all the tutoring. I don't know if you remember, if you follow the stock market in China, it was a whole sector was wiped out a few years ago. It's like the tutoring sector, where you have these courses in extra math or extra Chinese or whatever. It's a huge industry, but for people who cannot afford it, they can never be part of this game, and their children will never get the best university or best jobs, so the government decided we simply make it illegal, so people will stop competing that way and create a good life for children, so you can have more children. If you only have one children, you have to spend so much money to educate them in order to get into the university and get a good job to support yourself for your pension, right? So it's huge structural problems, and some people believe that the reason why Xi Jinping is the guy who brought China's economy down with a real estate bubble burst is because he's so powerful that he can do this. Before they tried, but then they always stimulated again, and they were too afraid when people got angry. And Xi Jinping is hardcore. He's just saying, it's going to be tough, but you have to get through it, And that is very different. He's also talking about common prosperity, because his biggest fear is a riot because there is too much social inequality in China. Some people are billionaires, right, and can send their kids to Harvard. Other families cannot even, have one child in a school because their economy is too tight, right? So they really want to redistribute. That's why they cracked down on the tech giants and all the big entrepreneurs in China. And this is scary for the rich and powerful people in China, because they really feel it's scary because more taxes could come, redistribution of health. It's actually quite communist, you could say.
Yeah,
or
but
socialist.
I guess that's the issue with the rising economies in general, but we also see that in westernized countries too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but just a final one. I think this is a really good one here. I would like to ask if China could be great partners rather than strong competitors. In which industry do you see the good partnerships being built potentially?
I'm actually writing a new book now about how our green transition in Europe is very dependent on China. And, I'm struggling with this question myself all the time, because I really believe that we are missing great research and development and new discoveries if we turn our back to China. So I believe it's so important that companies, governments, universities cooperate, because China is spending more than any country in many of these new areas. So you would only lose something if you didn't cooperate. But so I believe in the green transition. I wish we could find ways to cooperate better, because Europe has an edge still. In a country like Denmark or Norway, we do have an edge in green transition, right? In some areas, at least, with electric cars or with energy, wind turbines. But the problem is, if you only see China as a rival and competitor, it's hard to cooperate, right? And the US and China also have this big power rivalry, where the American government of Biden is saying we would love to cooperate with China on climate change, on global health, those big issues that we can only agree on. But the problem is China sees it all connected more holistically. So they don't want to, how can we be friends in one area and foes in another? So they kind of say we have to have a better relationship in total if we should really move something on this global agenda. But because China is gravity, and because China is evolving into what I would call a green superpower, I can't see how we can not cooperate. So this is the most important area, I believe.
Yeah, and I think that concludes also the webinar here, that collaboration is much more preferable than being,
Sure.
severe competitors. Competition is of course good to develop, right? But it has to have a certain balance, right?
Yeah.
Christina, thank you a lot, and thank you to the entire audience calling in today. It's been super interesting. We also see here the contact details for Christina. We will share the presentation as well as the recording from today's webinar, so we will distribute that for all the sign-ups. Christina, you did an amazing job. So thank you to you once again.
Thank you to you, all of you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, we'll see each other next time. And until then, have a nice week. Bye-bye.
Bye.